I had them on long before I dial up. How they came and they on top and I'm a mile up.
All right, folks, welcome. This is Jacquie Lukman.
And I'm Uncle Baba.
And welcome to another episode of the Cypher and Lukman Nation.
The most dangerous show on social media. Maybe not the most technical, but damn sure the most dangerous.
Yeah, we had some weird technical glitch that we just figured out. I don't know what happened, but yeah, we're so glad you're here. And look, what do we always say?
But
this is what happens when you don't have that CNN money, when you've got that independent journalist money.
And we don't have an intern.
No interns, just our intern is asleep upstairs on the bed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Brewski, the Lukman's intern.
Yep.
But hey, look, we have not done a cipher in a while.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, you're dealing with two trying to be tech savvy Gen Xers. So, you know.
Is that what we are?
We are Generation X.
Okay.
Yep.
Man, I remember when Gen X was edgy and frightening.
The MTV generation.
And oh my God, now I have arthritis and it's almost my bedtime.
Not even special anymore. Yep.
So, Baba, here we are again in the Cypher and Lukman Nation.
Yes.
And it has been a while since we have done one of these, folks, and we appreciate you, just kind of hanging out with us, sticking with us. And we decided, we can't take for granted that everybody who hangs out with us over on Lukman Nation hangs out with us on Black Power Media, and everybody who hangs out with us on Black Power Media always hangs out with us on Lukman Nation. So, we want to make sure that we hit all our folks and that we cross-pollinate because, we like cross-pollination. Yep. It's good for the environment. Yep. So, here we are.
Yep. And so again, let's get this housekeeping out of the way again. If you're in the audience, man, let us know if we're having any sound problems or anything like that. Just try to be our eyes and ears for us, please. Like, subscribe, join, hit the notification bell. If you invite your friends, your enemies, y'all know the drill. Y'all been around for a while. So, we're just trying to introduce the Lukman Nation experience to your friends and
and even people you don't like, especially
people you don't like. Yeah, especially them,
because they're the ones who need the most.
They do. Yep. Give them an excuse to be even madder.
Exactly. Yep. And can we be honest? Can we just be honest with our folks? It's nice to have to keep our own space, because sometimes we say stuff that not everybody can take. So, we recognize that our sensibilities are different from other folks. Y'all know how we rock over here.
What you want to say is, sometimes we can't get loose like we want to.
So we can get real loose and funky in all kinds of ways here over in Lukman. Not saying that we can't on Black Power Media. It's just, we have time constraints, and, we want to make sure that we get the channel off to a good, solid start before we start truly terrifying people with the full Lukman Nation experience. That's why you come over here. Anyway.
Yep. So now that that's out the way.
Now that that's all out of the way, listen. Oh, he hopped off. I guess we're talking tonight about someone who I actually just learned about very recently. Honestly, when I met Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly.
Right.
And I learned about him because, she, I think she wrote the foreword to a new book about him. And then I found out there was a previous book written about him. So there's this 2-volume massive work about this giant of Black radical thought and action that I'd never heard of.
Right.
And that's Hubert Harrison. And I think it's important to talk about Hubert Harrison because, like so many of our historical figures, our leaders, they're complex people.
Yeah.
And they're parts of the story that people might not want to dig into, but are very important. And there's always still so much to learn. So tonight, we are really, really pleased to have with us, and let me have him. He's already smiling because we're so excited. What's going on, Dr. Rhone Frasier?
Yes, yes.
Dr. Rhone.
Welcome. Thank you, Jacquie. Thank you, Abdus. Thank you for supporting me at the church, the place where we met, Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ. Thank you for supporting my liberation theology class, which was a conception of another member, Crystal Lewis. I want to thank Crystal Lewis for proposing that, and I want to thank you for inviting me to talk about Hubert Harrison, this big book, because this is important, Jacquie and Abdus, because how our experience is interpreted, this is something that Hubert Harrison said in pieces that he wrote, in articles that he wrote. Too often, he said, we get a white lens, we get the white view. He was talking about the curriculum at HBCUs. He didn't call it, he called them Negro colleges in his language. We call them HBCUs now, but at the time he was writing, he called them. And he said too much of the curriculum has been told from a white point of view. So I still think we need to study the white point of view, not to believe it or internalize it, but to see exactly how it's a white point of view. And I encourage everyone to read this long tome because it still gives you an idea of what journalism is, what you, Abdus, do when you talk about your experience in the nation, what you, Jacquie, do when you talk about your experience in independent media, working with Sputnik Radio and comparing that to the mainstream that we get. Well, what Hubert Harrison did in his whole life was the kind of independent journalism in the Negro World newspaper. But the way his life was told ultimately is still from a white point of view. That doesn't mean we shouldn't know it. We should read it, but still understand that it's not exactly from his perspective. And that's what makes the writing interesting. That's what makes the struggle that we are working for, that you work for on Sputnik Radio, real. The fact that we have still subconsciously been taught the wrong information about who we are and the agency we have. It's not completely, you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but you still should learn how Hubert Harrison's life was still told from a white point of view. But I still respect Jeffrey Perry. Jeffrey Perry gave me a copy of the work he did of Hubert Harrison's writings. So I respect him and the labor of love that he spent his life in. But after reading the book, there were some parts of the book, parts of his life that was told from a white point of view and should really be told from the perspective of people within the organization that supported Hubert Harrison, which was UNIA.
Well, Dr. Frasier, and thank you for coming on. I got to say to the audience out there, there's a lot of people that contributed to Luke My Nation, our development, and all those things. And Dr. Frasier, you are one of them. I mean, we're not just here because we know so much. We were here because we met people like you, and who we attended your liberation classes and everything. So trust me, the Luke Minds, we've been blessed to have some powerful people in our circle. Yeah. What I wanted to say to you, ask you, Dr. Frasier, is when you say from a white perspective, here I am as a layman. What do you mean by that, and why would that be a problem?
Oh, I mean, when I say from a white perspective, I mean, I know Jeffrey Perry means well, and again, to know about Hubert Harrison, you must read Jeffrey Perry. He has become the authority. He has studied him and know every detail. However, what I mean by a white perspective is in the 12th chapter, in this second volume, he has a 12th chapter called The Period of Garvey's Arrest. And the reason I say from a white point of view is because most of the sources that Perry is telling the story of Garvey's arrest from is from reports from agents, government agents, who already have a bent to try and criminalize Garvey. So that is what I mean. And at this time, J. Edgar Hoover is taking the helm of the Bureau of Investigation. And he's looking to, like he did with Jack Johnson, find some law, and he had to find and look hard to criminalize Marcus Garvey with. To put everything in context for our listeners, Garvey was Harrison's biggest employer. But Perry writes that what Garvey did was take Harrison's model that Harrison was doing before Garvey came to Harlem and make great financial profit from it and maintain ownership of it. And so what is clear in the book, Abdus and Jacquie, is that there is some intellectual jealousy that Harrison has of Garvey. But one thing that can't be denied is the foundation, that economic foundation Garvey provided for Harrison. I think his salary was something like $30 a month, which is the most he ever got, really, as working as a writer, doing independent journalism. Right. And that's what really motivates me. I'm motivated by Jacquie's work every day, listening to her and Sean Blackman on By Any Means Necessary. And I always think of it in terms of what Harrison was doing with Garvey in that 1, 2, 3 year time period between 1919 and 1921. Those 3 years were a powerhouse for independent Black journalism that changed so many people's lives. You know, Tony Martin writes about Ho Chi Minh came to the United States looking for where Garvey's office is because he read the Negro World newspaper.
Wow.
And
That's
his paper got, his paper reached.
Hold on for a second right there. That's some deep stuff right there.
Yes.
The fact that Ho Chi Minh came to Harlem and said, where is Marcus Garvey's office? Right. Because I want to meet this man whose paper I read that is full of information about Black people in the United States and the diaspora. Ho Chi Minh read news about us. So we always bring up this point, y'all, and I don't think we will ever stop bringing it up. If our ideological teachers were internationalists and they understood the importance, so much so that Ho Chi Minh would come to a whole nother country and be like, where is the dude who writes this stuff about Black folks that I need to meet him? What is our problem with expressing and being in solidarity with not only Africans throughout the diaspora, but other working class, poor, and oppressed people around the world? What's our problem? Okay, that's my last aside. Let me go. Please go ahead. Sorry about the interruption.
No interrupt. That was along with the flow of Abdus's question. So the reason it was so attractive, Jacquie, to your point to Ho Chi Minh was because it was not written from a white point of view. It was not written from the government agents that were trying to criminalize Garvey. And that was the only disappointing, not one, but maybe 5. But again, the amount of knowledge Perry gives the individual, that he gives the reader about the content of what Harrison said must be read. He writes this article. It's probably one of my top 4 articles by Hubert Harrison called Just Crabs, where he's talking about how the Socialist Party basically uses their money to divide the Negroes against each other. And so Harrison says at the end of this article, quit being just crabs. He's talking specifically about A. Philip Randolph and Chandler Owen. But the way that his life turns out, Jacquie and Abdus, unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, he becomes a kind of informant, Harrison does, against Garvey and the UNIA. So although in 1920 he critiques Chandler Owen and A. Philip Randolph, by the end of 1922, he's doing the same thing when he writes to the New York World editor comparing the UNIA to the Klan. And he's subtly trying to get money from them, trying to have them employ him. They don't employ him the way that Garvey does. He'll never find that kind of employment to his death. But he still writes to them. And I think what he saw in choosing to do that was how the tide was really turning against Garvey. And he made the choice that he might as well go with that tide, go with that tide against Garvey. But and so he succumbs to a white point of view to Abdus's question, even though he writes against that very strongly. by the second year of writing for it, he succumbs to the white point of view. Hubert Harrison does.
So when you say, Dr. Frasier, that Harrison succumbs to the white point of view, what is it, and that the tide was turning and he succumbed to this pressure? What was the pressure? Was the pressure of the Black intelligentsia that had fallen out with Garvey?
Yes, exactly.
Was it the FBI that was clearly after Garvey?
Yes.
Pretty much the whole J. Edgar Hoover. Garvey was his first assignment as an FBI agent.
Absolutely.
Period. So what were the pressures that Harrison succumbed to that made him feel like he needed to, do what he did ultimately and turn against Garvey?
Definitely. Those two factors, Jacquie, that you said, the Black intelligentsia, you had Tony Martin says it's Du Bois that writes a letter to the Secretary of State, but that didn't come until 1923. Mm-hmm. Also of the intelligentsia, you had Cyril Briggs. And I think one of the gems that I learned from Jeffrey Perry is that Cyril Briggs, his letters, he was the one who told the government, if you want to get him on any charge, since the government was looking for something to charge him with, you should get him on a mail fraud charge. That idea came from Cyril Briggs.
Wow.
Which Tony Martin says also the New York district attorney, well before Harrison, succumbed to the tide, the New York district attorney, his name is Edwin Kilrow. He had already got wind of what Garvey was already about and trying to send agents. Garvey writes about an assassin named George Tyler, who Garvey said was sent to him, Garvey, by Edwin Kilrow to kill him. This was in 1919. And one of the scenes in my play, because I'm a playwright, I've written 5 plays. Mm-hmm. And the last play I wrote is about Amy Ashwood Garvey. And there's a scene that came very vividly after a lot of study of what that kind of looked like. Amy Ashwood Garvey literally threw her body and wrestled George Tyler to the ground when he came to the UNIA office. And I want to say the latter part of 1919. They got married later that year, December, Christmas Day of 1919. But before then, the government, to your question, through the district attorney and through the Black intelligentsia from Du Bois and from really Cyril Briggs, Jeffrey Perry does a masterful job of giving you some of the elements in both, but in certain ways, he doesn't explain the deeper context of the neo-colonialism that was happening. And what I mean by that is how Black agents were around Garvey who were hired hands. There were certain aspects of the Garvey movement Perry discussed that could have used more of Garvey's interpretation. And we have to trust what Garvey said. And that's how I'm coming to reading Hubert Harrison. If we really examine what Garvey said himself, we should see the holes in some of what Perry says.
Dr. Frasier, I wanted to, for the sake of time, I wanted to get into some of the points in Perry's biography. Let's deal with the introduction by quoting Eugene O'Neill saying intentional uplift amounts to a dam. What does that mean?
It means it doesn't. He's saying it doesn't amount to anything. It was kind of a tete-a-tete between Eugene O'Neill and Hubert Harrison, who had reviewed his play, The Emperor Jones, favorably, and Eugene O'Neill wrote him thanking him for his review. And there was kind of a mutual disdain, you could tell, about Garvey, even though Garvey was employing Harrison. So, yeah, that was an interesting choice Perry made of having Eugene O'Neill saying intentional uplift amounts to a dam, because Harrison did not really believe that. He was talking about the necessity. A lot of his early Negro World articles was about the necessity for intentional uplift because we live in a white world. Our subconscious is trained to think like a white supremacist and to disparage everything Black. So the Negro world provided the very necessary intentional uplifts. Eugene O'Neill's point was anytime you're making too much of an effort to uplift any group, it's not going to mean anything. And that's something that was totally at odds, totally against with what the Negro World newspaper was about.
That is really interesting. Nuance, that word that so many people don't like, but is extremely, extremely important. And I think it's some of that kind of relational nuance and the political nuance that might be kind of the reason why some of these points that you raised may be missing in Perry's interpretation of some of Garvey's letters, because he says that the Garvey family, the Harrison family, when Harrison's children were still alive, they gave him Harrison's letters, all of his stuff, and said, look, do with this what you want. And there is actually an enormous collection of Hubert Harrison's works, his letters, his memoirs, all his diaries at, I think, the university, at Columbia University.
Yes.
And I think there's a link to it. And before this show ends, I'm going to look for it and see if I can grab it and pop it into the chat for you all. But you mentioned that there's a lot in this book about the relationship between Hubert Harrison and Marcus Garvey, and in particular, the UNIA and the organization of Harrison's that preceded, that kind of literally the UNIA was built off of. So there's a point that you make about in the fourth chapter, incompletely interpreting why the UNIA travel to Liberia failed. And then there's the issue of the correct Garvey aesthetic. Wrap that into what that means in the context of Harrison's organization, UNIA that came after it, and was there tension between Harrison and Garvey because of that transition?
Yes, there's no doubt. Intellectual jealousy was going on. And it was clear that Hubert Harrison was intellectually jealous. One of the men that Harrison wrote about, Perry quoted a letter from him. His name is escaping me now, but he called Hubert Harrison Garvey's bitterest enemy. And this is while Harrison was still working for Garvey. But I believe there's something to be said, Jacquie and Abdus, about the respect that Garvey had for Harrison's writing. It's immense. And when you read it, when you read his critiques, when you read his clear, I think if I could put it into one sentence before I answer your question, one sentence that encapsulates the power of Hubert Harrison's writing that Garvey was aware of, it is, show me whose bread you eat and I'll tell you whose song you sing.
Oh.
It's clear that from what Harrison said that in that Just Crabs article. It's clear that Marcus Garvey knew like nobody else, Harrison could show to the reader like Ho Chi Minh, to the reader like those Jomo Kenyatta, to the reader like those in South Africa. He could show like nobody else the bread that people eat, and how the reason they eat the white capitalist bread is the reason they sing their song.
Oh,
but he wrote it in a way where you want to get your own bread. You know, Billie Holiday's song, God Bless the Child That Has His Own. Garvey demonstrated that. Harrison explained that. And the explanation made people move. To your question about Liberia, the Liberia trip failed. Tony Martin is really the first one to write about this, but Perry is the second. According to Perry's biography, because he's writing about Hubert Harrison, he will take Harrison's point of view as to why the Liberia trip failed and just leave it alone. And that point of view is the reason the UNI trip to Liberia failed is because of Garvey's blabbing, his lecturing. When you really study it, it's the lecturing that caused the whole UNIA to form. So what Perry misses in just quoting Harrison and leaving that for the reader as to the only reason why the UNI trip failed was the relationship that certain capitalists had with Liberia, specifically Firestone, Harvey Firestone.
Okay.
Tony Martin does a better job of explaining that the Liberia trip failed, and Garvey himself. The Liberia trip failed because Harvey Firestone made very clear to the Liberian government, you let Garvey in and you can forget our business relationship. So that needed to be put in when he talks about Liberia, when Perry talks about Liberia. That whole context, that's what I mean by the context. He needed to have a wider context to explain that it wasn't just Garvey's lecturing and blabbing that caused the Liberia trip to fail. It was the greater context of neo-colonialism, where, you know, Firestone was in control of that Liberian government. And Arthur Barclay is his name. Garvey names the prime minister of Liberia who denied him and the UNIA entry, Arthur Barclay. And Arthur Barclay was somebody who was clearly paid under the economic control of Harvey Firestone, of the Firestone rubber, because, you know, that was the most lucrative export for Liberia at that time in the 20s. So just a greater context about the reason the Liberia trip failed was why a greater context was needed from Perry. You had, what was your next question or point about the book?
About the aesthetics.
The correct Garvey aesthetic.
We need this today, and you do it already. What in the way that you talk about Black Panther, Jackie and Abdus, you already have that aesthetic. It's just like, for example, Black Panther. The film, in my opinion, was great. However, at the end, it didn't question the role of that white intelligence officer who's seen as the friend of Wakanda, who's seen as somebody Wakanda should trust. So the correct Garveyite aesthetic would say, is this historically accurate? Have we historically seen a constructive role of a U.S. Black or white intelligence officer working harmoniously with an African self-determining government? Have we ever seen that? So that's the correct Garveyite aesthetic that's used to describe the artistic standard of films. In Perry's biography, I think Perry's brilliance, and I'm so glad he put it in, was when he quoted Tony Martin saying the correct Garveyite aesthetic was a letter to the editor to the Negro World. A woman named Mrs. Corby had read an article that Hubert Harrison wrote praising, it was the review Harrison wrote praising the Emperor Jones. And she said the only reason he's praising it is because it, the play turned film, has become a commercial success because it shows Black people ignorant. And if Harrison is praising it, then he is really under their control. He is proof that some of us intelligence and brains for some of us means we're going in the wrong direction. And what Perry does is he quotes Tony Martin saying, this letter that this woman, Mrs. Corby, writes demonstrates the correct Garveyite aesthetic in that the Great White Way generally only promotes as good musicals that degrade Negro people. And The Emperor Jones is an example of that. Perry describes it as a play that's this kind of revenge fantasy against the Garvey movement, because The Emperor Jones is about this Pullman Porter turned ruler of a Caribbean island who's like a tyrant. And he dies at the end, and the audience is supposed to feel satisfied. Oh, good for the people, they got rid of this tyrant. And Harrison praises it. And Mrs. Corby critiques Harrison harshly, and Martin praises it, and Martin praises that as the correct Garveyite aesthetic. And Jeffrey Perry says, this is what made the Negro world, that you had this kind of discourse going on about what is a Black aesthetic. That word is bandied around so much. I'm sure Abdus, Jackie, it means nothing, just like white supremacy now. And then you see the people saying it, and it's like, no, this is not, a Black aesthetic. Just because something is Black or Black people are in it or wrote it doesn't mean it's from that aesthetic. So I'm grateful Jeffrey Perry mentioned what artistic standard meant in the Negro World newspaper.
You know, I'm so glad that you tied it in to what we're still fighting with now. Jackie and I were just talking about, the Thomas Sowells and the Candace Owens and all, still trying to fight these anti-Black narratives from, well, I won't put Candace Owens as an intellectual, but somebody like Thomas Sowell, who's passed off as an intellectual, and others, so that was a good point. But this was something, Dr. Frasier, that really got to me, was interesting to me, is the white people versus Negro, the white people versus Negroes. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Incredible.
Get into that for us,
yeah,
please.
why is that still relevant? I mean, we know why it's still relevant today, but in this context, why do you say it's still relevant today?
Because the Negroes, Harrison's point in that article, White People versus Negroes, is why are the big Negroes, and what I mean by big are those that have a lot of power in their time, why are they ignoring J.A. Rogers' book, From Superman to Man? And it's showing how, as a Black person, you can come from being a poem reporter to be an enormously influential person that can be Black people's Superman, the way Garvey was to so many Black people. Why, Harrison asks, is this being ignored? And he explains they're being ignored because of the slave psychology that so many big Negroes are still under. And he basically is saying they're paid to ignore it. And it's a lot of people today that we can think of. Jeffrey Perry mentions intellectuals today that copy the dynamic between Du Bois and Spingarn controlling Du Bois. The dynamic between Alain Locke and Kellogg, and how Kellogg controlled Alain Locke, and Alain Locke kind of reinterpreted the new Negro, but he depoliticized it the way that Garvey and Harrison politicized the new Negro and made it more palatable for a white audience. So even though he doesn't mention Locke, that White People versus Negro article in so many ways prophesies the behavior of Alain Locke and how they will come in and say, no, Black culture is this. And what Black culture is to Alain Locke is completely depoliticizing it. It has no political ambition. It has no Black nationalist ambition. But they take basically what Garvey did and just depoliticize it. Take what the Negro world did and depoliticize it. So it's such a powerful article, White People versus Negroes, because for Harrison, that is the bigger struggle. And by Negroes, he means the big Negroes. When will that fight be? When will the big Negroes, the ones who have been designated to be the representative for the race, when will they begin to question the assumptions that their capitalist owners have them under? It's an important question.
Oprah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I'm thinking also of Tyler Perry and Lionsgate. We don't question that dynamic enough. Yes, Tyler Perry worked hard. We can say that. Yeah, he worked hard to get, he slept in the car, but he would not have had the support. He would not be as successful without the support of Lionsgate. So can we ask the question, if he does something Lionsgate genuinely disapprove of content-wise, will it be produced?
Right.
And this is where Hubert Harrison's writing comes through, because he hits that mark and says, regardless of, it should be produced. And he's begging us, the reader, to really get back to that aesthetic that he was writing with Marcus Garvey. We need to have our own standards. And the NAACP Image Awards is nice because it's recognition that allows you some coin. Nobody should turn down coin.
Right.
But it's still run by the NAACP. And they have a deep history with Marcus Garvey. Garvey reached out to them, Tony Martin said several times. And, spirit has really moved on me, Abdus and Jacquie, to feel the rejection that Garvey felt when he tried to reach out to them. Similar to the rejection that a Black man feels when trying to really make a family connection. And just rejection. And so he formed his own. And that's what J.A. Rogers did. And that's what Hubert Harrison, we get the writings of Hubert Harrison because we formed our own instead of constantly begging them to accept us. We have to form our own. This is what you're doing with Luke One Nation. You're creating your own channel. You're recording it. It's going into posterity. We're going to be writing about it. We should reference it. We have conversations that we can't have on mainstream media because it's too black or too fill in the blank. We can have it here. We can quote it here. We can be basis for progress. It can be basis for knowing how to look at something. And in the video form, we can watch it at our convenience. We don't have to go to the library. It's not like a newspaper. If you miss it, there's no more paper copies forever. No, we can always access it. So they gave us great opportunities. They gave us a blueprint. I think, I know Abdus and Jacquie, you're sympathetic to myself to the Cuban Revolution. They're very informed on the breadcrumbs that was left before them. Garvey and Harrison left a huge breadcrumb for our liberation. Jeffrey Perry is part of that breadcrumb.
I'm just sitting here like thinking of all of the conversations that you and I have had about these issues that we have had with you, Rhone, in the church parking lot before COVID, after the liberation college classes, after church. And by the way, y'all, yes, we are all believers in Jesus Christ up in here today. So if you have a problem with people of faith, this really ought to dispel all of that for you. Some of us, quite a few of us, do have quite a bit of revolutionary sense. The conversations we have on Black Power Media, the conversations we just had this morning on the Remix Morning Show about Oprah and and Tyler Perry and the entertainment industry being the gatekeepers for Black culture. And
Harrison always bashed against that gate. And these are the gatekeepers.
Yes.
This is their name. This is the gate they're keeping. This is who's paying them to keep the gate. And look, it don't have to be that way.
And
it doesn't have to stay this way all the time.
Yes, and how they even use other African people from around the diaspora against us in this whole. This is amazing.
It's funny because that you said that, because we were just talking the day about the whole Hollywood debate between the Black British actors and versus the American Black actors,
which is something that's ginned up by the very system
it is
that keeps it's not. So I mean that's why I think it is important that we understand, and I know that we always tell people, look, you've got to read, and we live in an age where people want microwave information because everything is on the internet, and you can just pull it up right there. But there is some stuff that you're not going to get unless it comes in a book, and there's some deeper truths and nuance and context that you are not going to get unless you read one book and then go to the bibliography and read all those books. I mean, and this is, I think, a great example of why reading, the exercise of reading, is revolutionary, because it changes your worldview. It changes your perspective on what is right now, based on what people in 1912 put down on paper, and like you said, Rhone, gave us the blueprint. But I got to ask you about Edgar M. Gray.
No, just give
Were you
me
going there? Okay.
It was this I felt like reading this is Perry serious in terms. He said he had a sentence that said Edgar Gray became the secretary of the Liberty League. The Liberty League was Harrison's organization before Garvey founded the UNIA, and I was like, does he not know, this is in 1922, does he not know, Harrison not know that Gray was a paid informant by this time in 1922? Because I read The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, and what Garvey said is that before 22, Edgar Gray was posing as a UNIA and was a paid informant. And he was paid, Garvey said, who paid him was the district attorney, Kilrow. And then to read him again, I'm like, come on. And then what happened later, Jacquie and Abdus, is I realized that Jeffrey Perry did reveal that Gray was not who he cut out to be, because he includes a diary entry of Harrison saying in his diary, at a meeting of the Liberty League, this was in 1924, At the meeting of the Liberty League, he's writing in his diary, Harrison writes, Gray raised an objection to a proposal that the Liberty League brought to the table. I have since removed him from the organization. And I was like, yes, because you got it. He got it. But I wanted, what I really wanted was Perry to take a more I wanted his critique of informants to be more authoritarian, to get him out there, to say, this guy has, I was hoping he would identify Gray as somebody who Garvey already identified as an informant. And, in this time of the popularity of the film, Judas and the Black Messiah, the whole film shows the perspective of most of it, half of it shows William O'Neill, who was an informant who the government paid to murder Fred Hampton. And I think there's some dovetails, there's some conversations that film is really having with Hubert Harrison to show the reader, us who care about Black organizations thriving, we have to be aware. And I believe, because we believe in spirit, because I believe in Christ, I believe Jesus will tell me when somebody's an informant. And Garvey was a believer. And Garvey was clear in his relationship with Christ, with his relationship with God, because he's very vocal about his relationship with God, that God told him who was the informant, and he's going to write this and that and this and that. And part of what he will write is this person was an informant. And Garvey's not writing it to make himself a hero. He's writing it to teach us, the way that other civilizations use their previous histories to learn from those mistakes and to know how to identify an informant who acts like he's all gung-ho with the organization. But when you leave, like when you're not in his presence, like William O'Neill left Fred Hampton's presence, he's informing the government everything, telling them everything that you're doing. So Edgar Gray, I was hoping, Perry would pick it up, but I think Perry redeems himself when he tells us that Harrison removed Gray from his organization.
So what do we know about Gray? I mean, where is he from? How did he? Is there any information on him?
I know what books I read him in, the Philosophy and Opinions. He just names. He names him on one page. Tony Martin. I was looking in the index of Tony Martin's Race First. Gray is not in the index of Race First, which is the long, detailed biography of Garvey. But he's mentioned in the Philosophy and Opinions, and he is in Perry's index. Very interesting character, one who I would assume is also, like William O'Neill, a Black man. But as we all know, this is what makes white supremacist society. You starve most of the Black people, and then when they end up, many of them in the criminal justice system, in order to get out, they have to take a plea bargain, which for some of them includes becoming an informant. This is the consequence of the giant prison industrial complex that you could definitely say Edgar Gray was part of. Another one, Richard Warren, was another informant that Garvey said informed against him. Warren was not mentioned in the biography, but Gray, Warren, William O'Neill, Gene Roberts, who informed, who was a homosexual informant, and the FBI used that. They said, if you don't inform, we're going to publicize your sexuality, your homosexuality.
And what year was that, to give people context so people can understand why that's important?
63. My friend Marcus Gardley wrote an incredible play called Betty Shabazz or the Nation. Betty Shabazz, semicolon, or the Nation. And it's basically the last part of Marcus Gardley's, not Garvey, Gardley, Gardley, is Gene Roberts explaining to the audience and to the NOI why he did what he did. Or not him explaining, but just him dealing with giving the government and the NOI information about everything Malcolm's doing. And that's a classic example for me as a homosexual man of how the government uses race. They can use a black person. The government uses sexuality. They can use a homosexual to inveigle and to basically undermine black organizations. And we had to be aware of that. Again, knowing our history about the informants. But that's a good question. Abdus, we only get his names, but I think maybe this might be an opportunity for future researchers to do their homework on Edgar Gray.
Well, the reason why I brought it up, Dr. Frazier, is because preparing for this, we actually was trying to research him, and there's nothing on him.
There's nothing.
Right. I think the only thing that we found on him was a brief mention on an article that was called "The Rise of the Black Caribbean Politicians," and was between 1915 and 1925. And he was briefly mentioned in one sentence there. But outside of that, there was nothing. And my frustration, Jacquie see my frustration. I said, there's nothing on this guy. You know what I mean? So, but I wanted to go on to something else.
Okay.
It was one of the things that, let me look here on my notes. I think, okay, well, yeah, we covered that. I don't have my glasses.
What are you trying to get to? Let's see. So we, so talk a little bit about the Liberty League.
Sure.
Because, like I said, we didn't know anything about Hubert Harrison.
No, I didn't know
before
anything
we started working with Dr. Sharice Burton-Stelly, and she talked about him and her work on this book in particular. So then, I learned that there's this organization that UNIA is modeled after. Right. So tell us about the Liberty League and the connection to the UNIA and what happened to the Liberty League.
Sure. The Liberty League, a lot of the model of it, as I mentioned, and as Perry writes, was what Garvey learned from. But he was actually doing a lot of what the UNIA, he started the UNIA in Jamaica, but what he saw Harrison do with the Liberty League had three basic elements. First, it had an organization that met regularly. It had a newspaper, which was called The Voice. And Harrison's newspaper was The Voice. And it also had a strong anti-lynching campaign. It had a strong anti-lynching campaign. Perry writes that the Liberty League petitioned the government to properly enforce the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that it wasn't enforcing in the South. And so Garvey witnesses this, but as I mentioned, and a lot of the documentation of the commercial success has been lost, but I think Tony Martin has done the best job of preserving it and documenting it. As Perry writes, Marcus Garvey would take that model he would already have the organization because he founded it in Jamaica, but he would take the model of Harrison, which was an organization that ran a newspaper and an organization that had a very fierce, not so much anti-lynching campaign, but basically a nationalist campaign, the UNIA. And it was very intent on creating chapters. Mary Rollinson, in her book, Grassroots Garveyism, Tony Martin has documented the hundreds of UNIA chapters across the country. The most UNIA chapters in the Caribbean was in Cuba.
Really?
Yes, it was a lot between 1920 and 1940. This is why Castro is so serious about respecting Marcus Garvey. And also a point that Perry makes in the biography is that the UNIA did not make headway in Jamaica, and that's simply not true. It made a lot of headway in Jamaica. He spoke to sold-out audiences when he returned in 1927. But to your question, what Garvey copied from the Liberty League is organizational skill. Not completely, because Garvey knew how to commercially make it successful. Why? Because Garvey learned how to be a printer in Kingston and in Panama. And his knowledge of printing made him establish connections with key people who could distribute the paper. Not only did he know how to print, he knew how to contact ship owners, and he knew how to establish relationships with them, and he knew how to pay them, and he knew how to take his money that he got from the people who were buying the Negro world to give to the shippers, to buy the ships. And so he had a huge command that rivaled Hubert Harrison's. So he was able to make a great commercial success out of that 3 model. Another thing, last thing that Garvey took Harrison writes from Harrison, not Harrison, but Perry writes from Harrison. Harrison also does write that Garvey took from him is the tricolor flag. I believe the colors of the Liberty League were brown, yellow, and white. And Garvey just took that model, Perry writes, and changes the colors to the colors of red, black, and green. Wow. So in many ways, he took the model, and this is so typical of astrological operators, if you know what I mean. Garvey's an astrological operator. What I mean by that, his sun sign is Leo. And Leo specialized not so much in originating, but in perfecting performance. And Garvey in his lifetime, absolutely, as did Castro, perfected the performance of how to make a newspaper profitable. He perfected it. Wow. He was really born to do it.
Right.
And it's powerful to see. And I don't want to begrudge him or say that Harrison hated him, but I think Harrison was jealous that Garvey could perform the commercial success of a newspaper in 1920 so well, make it popular. And I think his faith too, Garvey's faith. Harrison was an agnostic, which means he never denied nor admitted the presence of God in his life. And I think Garvey's belief in God helped him reach that commercial plateau that nobody else could reach.
Right, especially with Black people. You know.
Yeah, especially, you're right. I think especially with Black people, who a whole lot of us are, where are we? In the church. But, especially since, just real quick, if you, during that period of time, if you see the growth of the UNIA, most UNIA chapters in this country were actually in a whole bunch of churches.
Right.
They were actually in a lot of churches. So that, I think that connection is very important to make. But
no, what I was going to say was it was interesting that you mentioned about Garvey's reception in 1927, because I mean, you know, in my studying of Garvey, which is nowhere as extensive as yours, but it's always that narrative that he was rejected totally in Jamaica. That, you know, I remember watching one so-called documentary where they actually showed Jamaican kids throwing rocks at him.
Yes, that's Stanley Nelson. Yeah. Do you remember how problematic his documentary was of the Panthers? His documentary is problematic about Garvey too. And it's that same bourgeois lens. You see it in his film about the Panthers. And that's not true. Thank you, Abdus, for bringing that up. Because I remember that part. And my parents, I was watching it with my parents, that part that you mentioned, and I remember of all the parts in Stanley Nelson's film about Garvey, that part I remember the most that you said, Abdus, when the kids were throwing rocks at him. I'm like,
that hurt me too. And I didn't even claim myself to be a Garveyite, but I was just studying it, and it really tore my heart.
Yeah, it was not true. It was not. It's disingenuous. It's not.
Wow, I am so glad to know that.
Not true. Yeah, Stanley Nelson. He also disrespected Huey Newton in his film on the Panthers, and he disrespected Garvey, and that's why if you ever read Dr. Julius Garvey's response to Stanley Nelson's film, that's what let me know. Like when I'll be honest with you, Abdus, when I first read Dr. Julius Garvey's response, I thought he was too harsh. But now that I've lived long and studied the Garvey, I'm like,
you're like, no, he wasn't harsh.
He was spot on.
He needed some more smoke.
Now this is another thing. I want to jump back to because you mentioned something about the commercial success.
Yes,
and I remember reading somewhere where his inner circle was giving Garvey's inner circle was giving him a lot of problems. I mean, so much so where and help me with this if I got it wrong, Dr. Frasier, but where he would send people out like to buy the boats and stuff, and they would come back with inferior, ships, or a lot of money was being lost. This is the narrative that's being told.
Yes.
There was a lot of wasted money.
Yes.
That his inner circle was giving him such a hard time that Garvey himself pulled guns out on people.
Yes.
Yeah. So could you like put some duct tape on all that and bring it together for us?
Yes.
What Harrison says is true. Let me clarify this. Was this part of this whole? Because I personally, I don't believe that it was accidental that these people were giving him such a hard time. So was this part of this overall, effort to discredit him?
Yes, it was. And as Harrison said, part of the fault is Garvey's, his trusting the wrong people. That was part of his ego mania. He's a Leo man. Sometimes that ego take over. And I'm just saying, not just true for Leo, but the reputation, at least for me, the egomaniacal disbelief. One thing that Perry misses is the concerted attack by Cyril Briggs I mentioned earlier. He had a whole vendetta. And I was sad to see how Cyril Briggs was just personally invested in destroying Garvey, and he did. But Garvey retaliated. Like you said, he took out a gun on somebody that he believed. Because remember that incident with George Tyler, right? It was somebody with a gun who was trying to kill him. So he had to defend himself. And I think we might have the elements for a very interesting film on Garvey's life, as long as the person does their homework properly. But I prefer a stage play to a film. But anyway, it has,
I would too.
It has the elements but to your question, yes. But part of it, Abdus, is Garvey making wrong decisions and trusting people who had no expertise. So I think he needed help in ways. But I want to say something that I mentioned in my IG video yesterday, and that is something that Amy Ashwood said when Gil Noble interviewed her in the early 60s. And she said, everything that happened to Garvey happened right on time. And it was because of his personality, yes. In part also, his failure was not only his personality, his failure was his enemies trying to undermine him and in succeeding him. But like I was saying, I thank God for Amy Jacques Garvey, his second wife, documenting his philosophy and documenting how the UNIA died. Because in documenting how it died, it once again provides a blueprint. So your question, Abdus, is really getting to that. Like, there were elements around him that was threatening. And I'm thinking immediately now of Umar Johnson. Yes. Talking to the Breakfast Club about the failure about his school. Because personally in my heart, I do not want his school to fail. However, I see already, I'm sure if you haven't already noticed, his personality. His opining on certain things unrelated to Black liberation.
But he is a Leo.
Nothing to do with Black liberation. But he wants to put his mouth on it. Right. And that reflects a kind of personality that's like, okay, how long is this going to last? So just focus, putting the head down and just focusing rather than getting caught up in, as you mentioned, Abdus, the distractions that Garvey got caught up in. This is something that Harrison also said. Harrison was also right in his Garvey's tendency to be too flamboyant. But in my mind, his desire for flamboyance doesn't compare to the example of financial freedom he demonstrated to so many people, including Malcolm X's father and Malcolm X himself, and Ho Chi Minh, and Fidel Castro.
I'm sorry, but I think I can't think about, especially being a native of New Jersey, I can't help but think about the Moorish Americans, Noble Drew Ali, the Nation of Islam. I mean, all of
Dr.
these,
Muhammad.
right. I mean, and even on the Christian side, I mean, Father Divine and a whole lot of them
Divine.
that all gained their inspiration from Garveyism and from that blueprint you talked about, which I mean, what you said about his second wife really documenting his philosophy and having that blueprint. Jackie and I did a show, I think maybe a year ago, where we were discussing the same thing. We were like, here we are trying to reinvent the wheel, and the blueprint is already there.
It is. It
Already
is.
done. It's already there.
It's already there.
Yep.
It's already there.
Mhm.
We don't have to contort ourselves. And it's a matter of uniting, doing what you're doing with this platform about it, talking about it. Don't we see what Garvey is saying about the Negro intellectuals that the white capitalists have designated then? Don't we see the same thing today?
Right.
Don't we know
Exact
who
same
the Negro intellectuals of today are? We don't need to name them. And so how are we going to respond? Because now that we've seen this has happened, now we have to learn with the knowledge, we have to apply it properly.
Wow.
We have to apply it properly.
So, you know, the final question, I think
Sure.
this points to exactly kind of where we are in our struggle for liberation. Because while, you know, I too am very thankful for Jeffrey Perry and his biographies of an intellectual and radical giant.
Yes.
And I love to bring up the fact that Hubert Harrison was an autodidact.
Yes.
He was, and I didn't even know what that word meant.
I still don't know what that means.
It means he was self-taught, just like us.
Okay, see, I learned everything.
He was self-taught. So that I think is the beauty and the power of love of your people and love of knowledge and the humility that you're never going to stop learning. You can always learn from someone else. And even with his human weaknesses, his jealousies, and whatever else that caused the rift between him and Marcus Garvey.
Yes.
Marcus Garvey, we have him as an example because of Hubert Harrison.
Because of Hubert Harrison. You're right.
And there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there about Hubert Harrison's connection to the Harlem Renaissance. And you know, just we may have to do another one of these because there's so much more of that.
So much.
Yeah.
But this is the question I think that is very important to me, at least. The way UNIA is framed in the book, in the biography, where it's not members of UNIA who are talking about the organization. Who's giving the information on UNIA in this biography, and why is that important, especially since we are looking back on the legacy of Hubert Harrison and how important he is to Garvey and everything else that we have to do right now?
Definitely. Who's giving the information is government agents. And they had an agenda, which is to find something that will make Garvey a criminal. So it's a bent. It's similar to what the government agent in Judas and the Black Messiah told William O'Neill, the informant. He said, the Klan is as bad as this Black Panther Party group. They're hate groups. So that's why we have to question the UNIA narrative. The UNIA, like the Black Panther Party, fed people. The UNIA was responsible for educating people. The UNIA inspired Elijah Muhammad. The UNIA allowed a space where one can see a debate, you know. So a lot of how Perry describes the UNIA is really like this group that is mindless and is unable to think without Garvey and will kill anybody at the drop of a hat on behalf of Garvey. And in response, I say that is not the correct image of the UNIA. They were very serious about self-defense. And they had reason, because their leader was going to be almost assassinated under the aegis of the New York District Attorney. So they defended just the way that any group would want its leader for another example, Cubans would want their leader Castro defended, and they successfully defended him against I don't know how many assassination attempts from the CIA.
Yeah.
So any group will defend its leader. And I took every sense about the UNIA being wild, crazy, fanatic over Garvey with a grain of salt and understood, okay, he is sympathetic to Harrison's perspective. So he is describing the UNIA the way Harrison would, not the way I would. But we still should know about this because similar thing happens today in terms of the way I see, and you talked about on your show, FBA. Right. And the Foundation of Black Americans, the way they dismiss Cynthia Erivo's interpretation of Harriet Tubman, the way they dismiss certain things because it's of a group that they think is fundamentally separate, different from their group. You know, the exclusionary ways.
Right.
So Perry was kind of doing that trick where he wanted the reader to exclude the way Harrison chose to separate himself from the UNIA.
Wow. Well, I don't know. I mean, we're definitely going to do one of these things again. But when you were talking about Dr. Frasier, I couldn't help but when you were talking about how we have to confront these narratives.
Yes.
Now, Jacquie and I'm going to bring it up again. The Candace Owens, man, and the rest of, you know, and I think that, all right, I'll let you explain this.
Yes.
How dangerous is, I mean, how important is it in this age of social media now? Because we're not dealing with newspapers anymore. We're not we're dealing with faster information, faster narratives being created and told. So what, you know, how much more important it is for us to confront these false narratives from people that like us.
It's so important. If anything, Garvey and Harrison teach us. Garvey did this too. And in fact, one thing I want to say on this video, I think Garvey had a more sophisticated understanding of neocolonialism than Harrison. And the reason I say that is because Harrison, in one of the Negro World articles, talked about when the U.S. colonized the Virgin Islands, which is the island chain that he is from, St. Croix, which is one of the Virgin Islands. He says a comment in 1920 that the U.S. putting natives in charge of the island is a good idea. Well, I read that. I was like, whoa, I totally missed that he said that.
Wow.
Because later he totally denounces the U.S. naval occupation of St. Croix and the rest of the Virgin Islands. Totally denounces it because he sees that the natives are paid by the U.S. naval occupation to be more brutal than the white governors, than the white leaders of the naval occupation. Garvey, by 1911, by the time he was, I would say, before he even turned 25, Garvey was clear about how U.S. imperialism requires some use of natives, but in a very, very tragic way, where, as James Baldwin said about Harlem, the black cop is worse than the white cop because they have more to prove.
Right.
Garvey was on that level that Baldwin was at early. He said the colored class is worse in Jamaica because they have more to prove to Downing Street, London, who give them money. Are you going to get more money? So I say that to say, about your question. Remind me your question again.
About the importance of confronting these false narratives in the social media age.
Social media age. So Garvey, because Garvey was more, thank you, Abdus, because Garvey was more sophisticated than Harrison on neocolonialism, he'll be able to tell you the capitalist owner. And so to your question, Abdus, find who the capitalist owner, because you'll find one, black or white. They're the ones that are making Candace Owens' voice so big. They're the ones that are making Tariq Nasheed's voice so big. Right. They're the ones that are making a few other voices who I don't want to say so big. Get to them and find out what's their incentive for paying, because there's the real dialogue in order to preserve, a white supremacist society. As long as you have the racists fighting each other, white supremacist economy will always thrive. But if you start to see it's a class war, which is what Garvey was more serious about, meeting with Edward Clark, as was Malcolm X, because people dog Garvey for meeting with the Grand Wizard of the Klan, but they don't dog Malcolm for meeting with Rockwell, the head of the American Nazi Party.
He did.
Or Elijah
because
Muhammad.
they understood it's a class war.
Right. Elijah Muhammad met with the Klan.
Exactly. Get to the root of who all these Candace Owens, study who pays her. Okay. That's how you avoid it. And of course, you gotta have to do your research. They're not gonna tell you, oh, such and such pays them. You find out. Follow the money. Follow the money. Like Harrison said, show me whose bread you eat, and I'll tell you whose song you sing. Garvey and Harrison were dedicated to exposing, showing whose bread people were eating.
Wow, that is so so bad. First of all, before we end for the night, I want to apologize to all of the Leos out there because I said something about Umar, Ricky Ryan. I am so sorry. Forgive me.
I love the Leos.
And for all the Leos out there, let me make it clear on the cipher. Dr. Umar Johnson is not a Leo.
I thought he was.
No, he's a Virgo.
I thought Umar Johnson was Leo.
Yeah. He's a Virgo.
I'm sorry. I love Leo and I love Virgo. I don't want to insult Leo men or Virgo men. I hope that.
Right.
But
it's just
it's just that nobody wants Umar Johnson. That's it. Nobody wants to claim him. No zodiac no sign wants to claim that man while he's acting a fool, and he's been acting a fool for a minute.
Not even a Gemini.
I know, and y'all are kind of anyway. Listen, Rhone, Dr. Frasier, we appreciate this talk. So much.
And you got to come over. Look, we got our shots, man. And look, don't judge us. We got our shots.
We got our shots.
So I mean,
fully vaccinated.
You got to come over to the bunker for dinner, man.
Yes,
you got to come over for dinner.
That.
Yeah,
we have got to have part 2, 3, 4, 5, because Hubert Harrison is a towering giant. Yes. And if you call yourself a Black nationalist in this country, you stand on that man's shoulders. And it's amazing. Just the stuff, just the little bit that we got tonight has been an incredible meal. And so, yes, definitely get that book. We got right into this, so we didn't even read Rhone's biography.
Oh yeah. We got to do that.
But we do need to do that. And let me hope before we go, because this is important. We need to let people know that, listen, it's not that we are particularly smart or all that special ourselves. We just hang around people who are amazing people and who do amazing work. So Rhone Frasier, if you didn't know, is an independent scholar and taught on the faculty of Temple, Princeton, and Howard universities. He's the author of, this is a book for you to get, Pauline Hopkins and Advocacy Journalism, which is a literary criticism of the 4 historical novels written by self-published journalist Pauline Hopkins. Mm-hmm. He's the co-editor of Critical Responses About the Black Family in Toni Morrison's God Help the Child. He edited a special collection on the meaning of the fiction of novelist Elizabeth Nunez, and he published an article about Marlon James's novel entitled A Brief History of 7 Killings. Mm-hmm. And he's currently working on an edited collection about the scholarship of Dr. Tony Martin, who is the editor of the Marcus Garvey Library. So we rock with people who know their shit.
And I wanted to say this too. If you ever write, because I'm a playwright too.
Yes.
If you ever, I mean, I wrote my first play I wrote when I was like in middle school, and I had a drama teacher go take my play out to California, and I ain't seen it since. So I'm sure it's been put on somewhere. But anyway, what I was gonna say, if you ever write a play about Marcus Garvey, let me know because I want to audition for that.
Let me tell you, you know where it's gonna come from.
I would love to be a part of that.
Thank
You
you.
gonna be
You know,
parading around the house in the whole uniform?
Oh, I don't want to be Marcus Garvey.
Oh, okay.
But I would love to audition for something there.
there's a part of Marcus Garvey's life that I always think about, and that is the time in London. So yeah, that time in London was special because I feel the pain of him having to separate himself from, and so this is where Stanley Nelson was right, except he was wrong in showing that that was only what Jamaicans thought. He was right in that he did leave Jamaica because the government made it hard for him, not the people, not the people, the government. And so him forcing himself to be estranged, I think is a conversation that, I feel needs to be explained and understood. Why he left Jamaica for England. And yeah, I'll say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a whole interesting story about
that is a story that's often
is.
not told off. That's not told often either.
It is. So I mean, listen, again, Dr. Frasier, thank you so very much for this amazing discussion. Everyone in the chat has been really enjoying. Listen, we didn't even share a whole lot of comments because everybody was just listening and soaking it all up. And so let's shout out Ricky Ryan.
Hi, Ricky.
In the chat, and she said that she remembers that you came to her book club.
Yes, about Jamaica Kincaid. A Small Place. I love that she read that book. I love we had that conversation. That was awesome.
Yes, and I don't know if you can see the comment on the screen there.
Thank you, Ricky. Thank you for the compliment. It means so much coming from such a committed reader and analyzer of what you read.
Absolutely is.
I'd love to talk to Ricky about any book. Any book you read, please tell me, Ricky, so I can read it and talk to you about it.
Yep. So this is from Deborah Rodriguez.
Thank you.
Hey, Debbie.
I appreciate it, Deborah. Thank you.
And we've got Phil Winter in the chat, John Kester. Oh, sorry, let me pull this down. Red Legend. We did have people who were engaging in this discussion, that just throwing out facts about Garvey, just adding to the discussion.
McGuire.
Red Legend.
Yeah, George McGuire started the African Orthodox Church. I believe that's who also influenced Albert Clegg.
Yes. Matter of fact, we just got his book.
We did. We did just get his book.
In Detroit.
Amazing.
Amazing message to the grassroots. Malcolm X.
Yes.
To the grassroots speech. Powerful. Thank you for telling us about George McGuire being moved by Garvey. Yep.
David Silberg in the chat. And he said, this is what he had to say.
Thank you. Oh, yes. It's always both and. It's never either or. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Thank you, Jeffrey Perry. Thank you, Jeffrey Perry.
Absolutely
for donating, giving your life to educating us on who Harrison is. You didn't just, and I want to thank Jeffrey Perry for not just taking the diary, but taking a diary and writing the story. You know, some people can't get that far. They just get the diary and we don't get the story. But Jeffrey Perry was able to tell the story. Thank you, Jeffrey Perry, for telling the story.
We have who is that? Emmanuel Kitso.
Oh, okay. Let's see. What did Emmanuel say?
Yes.
Oh,
That's what John Henry Clark said. And Tony Martin says the same thing. Emmanuel says here, bits and pieces from the Garvey movement. Bits and pieces. Alain Locke took bits and pieces. Certain others after him took bits and pieces of what Garvey did. NAACP got the whole idea of marching from the UNIA. Hanging the banner. They wouldn't do street demonstrations, and that's something that the first wife was more vehement about than the second wife. Street demonstrations, which the NAACP did. But John Henry Clark has said something so similar to what Emmanuel said. They take our culture and give it back to us. We see this especially in the music. The music from the Rastas, particularly Peter Tosh, Legalize It, is taken in such a different context now.
Wow.
It's used as a crutch. You know, marijuana, I see, is used as a crutch instead of motivation for liberation and to be on that. Yeah. The music industry, that is especially true in the music industry, Emmanuel. How our culture is taken and sold back to us, and we have to pay for it.
Right. That's right.
So we have I wanted to shout out to Black with the Black Myth podcast.
Right.
That's on Black Power Media.
Right. And our girl Karena Akripe.
Right.
Karena. I appreciate the compliment.
With Telejaguar. Please check out Telejaguar on Facebook, y'all.
Yeah, she's coming back to the show too.
Yes.
And also, look, Ajamu
Baraka was in the building.
Yep, he was in the building.
I don't know if he's still there, but he was in the building.
I gotta shout my man out in Myth, Prince Johnson.
Beautiful.
Man, my brother in Myth. My both brothers in arms in Myth. Yep.
So listen, this has been a beautiful discussion, Rhone. Thank you again. This will not be the last of these discussions, and we really, really appreciate your scholarship and your passion, and your spirit. Your spirit is just amazing, and we love you, and we appreciate you.
I love you too.
Yeah, and my birthday, we have my birthday dinner, which is I'm a Gemini, so my birthday's next month. And you're coming over for my birthday dinner, bro.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's an invitation right there.
Thank you. I'll make sure I get vaccinated by then. Now I really have to get vaccinated.
Okay, cool.
Well, look, who cares? But just come.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
So thank you all, everyone, for joining us here on the Cipher in Lukman Nation. We really hope you enjoyed this conversation and appreciated it. This will probably pop up on Black Power Media.
Oh, I'm sure. We share the love. But let me ask you this. Let me say this to you. As much as informative as it is, you got to admit this was dangerous. This was. This was probably the most dangerous podcast going on. This was some dangerous stuff.
This was fire. Yep. And listen, we don't know how frequently we're going to do the Cipher, but trust me, the Cipher is not going away because this is what we do here in Lukman Nation. So thank you all very much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you. Take care. Peace if you're willing to fight for it. And we've got to fight for it, y'all.
Peace.
Good night.
Good night.
I had them on line before I dial up. How they came and they on top and I'm a